formation. D, stand by. Roll up on H, ready 2. Push is off, Q.
Hello and welcome to our viewers joining us from all around the world. I'm Rosemary Church. Just ahead here on CNN Newsroom, Germany and the US announced plans to send battle tanks to Ukraine. Could fighter jets and long-range missiles be next? CNN goes on the road in rural China and government minders follow ahead how they disrupted our coverage of COVID and the Lunar New Year. And hear from one of the greatest winter athletes in history, American skier Michaela Schifrin, after her record-setting World Cup win.
Roll track is off.
Live from CNN Center, this is CNN Newsroom with Rosemary Church.
Mic is off.
And we begin this hour in Ukraine, where the president's chief of staff says the country's air defense system has been activated and Russian missiles shot down. At least 2 rockets were reported in the Mykolaiv region. This news after we learned of emergency power outages in Kyiv and several regions because of a threat of a missile attack. Meantime, we are seeing a united front from Ukraine's Western allies as the United States and Germany announce plans to send dozens of sophisticated tanks to the battlefield. The US will be sending 31 Abrams tanks to Ukraine, with President Joe Biden saying the move will help enhance Kyiv's ability to defend its territory and counter Russia's evolving tactics. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says his country will be sending 14 Leopard 2 tanks, with training expected to begin quickly. He said Western allies will continue to support Ukraine, but warned against escalating the war.
In everything we do, we must always make it very clear that we are doing what is necessary and what is possible to support Ukraine. But at the same time, we are preventing the war from escalating into a war between Russia and NATO, and we will always continue to observe this principle.
Germany's main governing body says its country, along with other allies, will provide about 80 Leopard 2 tanks in total to Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky says the decision to send main battle tanks to his country proves, quote, freedom is only getting stronger.
Robbie, track to be 15 seconds.
On camera,
US, Germany now.
And volume. The speed of training our military, the speed of supplying tanks to Ukraine, the amount of tank support. We have to form a fist of tanks, a fist of freedom, which will not allow tyranny to rise again.
US President Joe Biden says the tanks will help Ukraine counter Russia's strategy on the battlefield, but insists they should not be viewed by Moscow as an offensive threat. CNN's Phil Mattingly has more now from the White House.
Raw track take C. 3 minutes 15.
We are fully, thoroughly, totally united.
For President Biden, a diplomatic breakthrough with dramatic battlefield implications.
Today, I'm announcing that the United States will be sending 31 Abrams tanks to Ukraine, the equivalent of 1 Ukrainian battalion.
The U.S. tanks set to significantly expand Ukraine's battlefield capabilities.
It makes it possible for Germany, but also for other European NATO allies to provide Leopard 2 battle tanks to Ukraine, and that will significantly strengthen their combat capabilities.
At the same moment, Europe's largest land war in 80 years sits in its most brutal and grinding phase.
These tanks are further evidence of our enduring, unflagging commitment to Ukraine.
And after weeks of U.S. officials dismissing the idea as untenable, with complex operating systems and significant maintenance requirements.
The maintenance and the high cost that it would take to maintain an Abrams is it just doesn't make sense to provide that to the Ukrainians at this moment.
But their inclusion, a central demand from German officials in order to clear the way for more immediate delivery of their own tanks, and to sign off on the delivery of German-made tanks by other allies. Now the trigger for a deal to unleash significant armor contributions from U.S. allies across Europe.
Germany has really stepped up. The Chancellor's been a strong voice for unity.
Biden's praise of German Chancellor Scholz intentional, officials said, even as it served to cover intense and often frustrating negotiations over the last several weeks, but ultimately leading to U.S. commitments that will take months, if not longer, to reach the battlefield.
Delivering these tanks to the field is going to take time. Time that we'll see and we'll use to make sure the Ukrainians are fully prepared to integrate the Abrams tanks into their defenses.
But those commitments unlock immediate results from allies.
The American contribution will be joined by an additional announcement, including that will be ready, available, and more easily integrated for use in the battlefield in the coming weeks and months from other countries.
The Russian ambassador to Germany declaring the moves, quote, extremely dangerous.
1 minute.
To take the conflict to a, quote, new level of confrontation. But U.S. officials downplayed the escalatory risk, as did Biden.
There's no offensive threat to Russia.
That's
if
a
Russian
phrase
troops
for you.
return to Russia, they'll be there where they belong. This war would be over today.
And while White House officials are candid, they see no near-term end to the war, don't really have a good sense of how things may end whenever they in fact do. They make clear that the support is both durable and will be long-lasting, as long, according to President Biden, as that support is actually needed.
Straight to the
in
spot
fact,
here.
it's worth noting that we are a month away from the one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That is a moment that White House officials are keying on right now, understanding that this is a long-term effort, and the symbolism, the importance of demonstrating the assistance that's been delivered up to this point and will continue to be delivered in the weeks, months, and potentially years ahead, is just as important as those tanks that will be delivered over the course of the next year. Phil Mattingly, CNN, the White House.
Cue, take.
CNN Salma Abdelaziz is tracking developments for us. She joined us now live from London. Good morning, Salma. So how's Russia reacting to this official news that the US, Germany and others will provide sophisticated battle tanks to Ukraine?
This is absolutely a major shift for Western allies in their support and their posturing of this fight in Ukraine. And it's when, of course, that Russia was quick to respond to with direct threats. One Russian official saying that they would consider those weapons shipments, those shipments of tanks, as legitimate targets, and that Russian forces will try to hit them as they're brought into Ukraine or even on the front lines. But this is also a NATO that is more united and perhaps stronger than ever. Still, of course, President Putin, with his comments, saying that the conflict could be prolonged with this tank announcement. Take a listen.
Right, check A, take A. 10 seconds.
I have no doubt that one way or another, sovereignty will be returned to Europe.
5 seconds, a little while longer.
Judging by the look of things, it's going to take a little while longer.
Cue, take.
Now, I keep referring to this shift, Rosemary. What do I mean by that? About a year ago, when this conflict started, it was unthinkable that the West would provide tanks to Ukraine. And that's because there was a very fine balancing act that was being played in capitals across the West. How do we support Ukraine, provide it with the weaponry and the materials it needs to fight Russian forces, but at the same time not aggravate Moscow so much that it widens and deepens this conflict? And that balancing act, that calculation, Rosemary, it's changing. And it's because Moscow is weaker than ever. Remember, they lost tens of thousands on the battlefield. They are very far from accomplishing any of President Putin's goals. And this has emboldened the United States and its partners. Take a listen to what John Kirby, a senior U.S. official, said.
Robbie, take.
There's no reason for an overreaction by Moscow here. These tanks pose no offensive threat to the Russian homeland. They do, however, pose a significant threat, not just the Abrams, but the Leopards, to Russian forces that are inside Ukraine illegally.
10 seconds. Stop this war.
So if Mr. Putin was worried about tanks, the best thing that he could do would be to take his troops and move them out of Ukraine and stop this war.
Cue. Take.
You hear there Mr. Kirby simply dismissing those threats. Again, something that kind of was unthinkable a year ago when Russia was threatening the use of nuclear weapons if the West escalated its support for Ukraine. So a major, major shift, as I said here, and one that really shows and sends a message to the Kremlin that Western allies will do whatever it takes, for as long as it takes, to help Ukraine win this fight.
And take a split. 42 with Defense Minister.
Ukraine's defense minister says the Western tanks will be used as an iron fist to break through Russian lines and liberate occupied territory. But he told CNN that tanks alone are not enough to defeat Russia.
Probably tracking take a 1 minute.
I sent the wish list cards to
no tag here. We'll come out on camera with Ukrainian military Russia intensifies.
And fighter jets also was included in this wish list. But we understand, seriously, we understand the priority #1 is air defense systems. We have to close our sky because Russia terrorizing, still terrorizing our cities, trying to hit our energy supplying systems, water supply systems. They're trying to put us to the dark, and they're fighting not with the armed forces of Ukraine. They're fighting with the civilian population, like it was done in Dnipro city against the house with the. Then a lot of people was killed, and we have to close our sky, to defend our sky. It's priority number one. After that, we need to get more armed vehicles, tanks, artillery systems.
15 seconds. IQ's finished the job.
Etc., etc. We have people, but we need weaponry. As was Winston Churchill, he told it, very famous quote.
5 seconds. Finish the
give
job.
us the tools, we will finish the job.
Q, type.
At the right tools could give Ukraine
B.
an edge as the fight for a key eastern city grows even more fierce.
Dissolve your map,
The
sound
Ukrainian
on
military
B.
says Russia has been hammering Bakhmut. CNN's Frederick Pleiken has details.
We'll be tracking to B. 2 minutes 45.
The Russian army claims its overwhelming firepower is decimating Ukrainian defenses on the most brutal front in this war around the town Bakhmut.
15 men just ran into this house. Yes, target hit. He managed to collapse in the middle of the building.
Ukraine has now acknowledged losing its last foothold in the small town Soledar north of Bakhmut. The Russians there, mostly mercenaries from the Wagner private military company, judging by their own claims.
We were fast to select the target, charge up and hit it. We hit it precisely. We hit the building right in the place where the ATGM was located.
But despite sources telling CNN the U.S. has advised Ukraine to withdraw from Bakhmut, even Wagner commanders admit Kiev's forces are fighting back.
The enemy puts up fierce resistance to our fighters. The enemy is
I remember when the wall behind
getting
Rosemary was open to the
reserves
newsroom.
and military supplies.
And the Ukrainians continue probing in other areas far from Bakhmut, the military releasing this video of a daring raid across the Dnipro River in South Ukraine, taking out a Russian command facility there. But to go on the offensive, Ukraine needs hundreds of main battle tanks. So far, Western partners have pledged about 100. Moscow has vowed to hit those tanks when they enter Ukraine, and is conducting a show of force of its own, sending the frigate Admiral Gorshkov, which Moscow says carries hypersonic missiles, to ocean drills with the Chinese and South African navies. But for now, Bakhmut is the epicenter of this conflict, and Ukrainian soldiers here say they will fight for every inch.
One day their artillery works, and the next day their infantry assaults. It's a difficult time now, but our boys keep standing their ground.
Ukrainian soldiers fighting on the front lines in and around Bakhmut who were contacted by CNN say they are absolutely elated to hear that Western-made battle tanks could be coming to Ukraine in the not-too-distant future. They say that tanks are a huge part of the equation here and have been helping the frontline troops a lot. Of course, they understand it's going to be a while before any Western-made battle tanks get here, but right now the Ukrainians say they need all the help they can get as the Russians are making a big push to try and go towards the west and take Bakhmut. For CNN, Kramatorsk, Ukraine.
H-Trans. Q.
Former US President Donald Trump may soon be back on Facebook and Instagram. Facebook's parent company Meta says it will restore his accounts more than 2 years after he was banned for allegedly inciting violence when his supporters stormed the US Capitol on January 6th. The decision comes on the heels of a similar move by Twitter, where he has more than 87 million followers. CNN's Joni O'Sullivan explains why Meta made this decision.
We're all tracking to C. 2 minutes.
Meta announcing the most politically consequential decision in its history, certainly here in the United States, announcing on Wednesday that it was going to let former President Donald Trump back on its platforms, which include, of course, Facebook and Instagram. Now, you might remember Trump was kicked off the platforms in the days after the attack on the US Capitol. Facebook at the time saying it was too dangerous for Trump to be able to have that megaphone that he might incite further violence. 2 years later, Facebook, Meta, has now said that it has reassessed its ban. It has determined that there isn't as great a risk of imminent violence or harm posed by Trump, and that they are going to allow him back on the platform in the coming weeks. Now, this is a boon in Trump's campaign for 2024. He has, of course, announced that he is running for president. Again, we have seen in the past the Trump campaign really effectively use and spend hundreds of millions of dollars on advertising on Facebook, because it is a very effective way they have found of targeting voters, but also fundraising. As you can imagine, a lot of people on both sides of the political spectrum here speaking out for and against this decision. Of course, many people saying it's important to be able to hear from a former president and candidate for president. That's including the ACLU, who had this statement. They said, "This is the right call, like it or not. President Trump is one of the country's leading political figures, and the public has a strong interest in hearing his speech." They said, indeed, some of Trump's most offensive social media posts ended up being critical evidence in lawsuits filed against him and his administration, and we should know we filed over 400 legal actions against him. And that's a very important part of all of this, of course. The ACLU saying there, although we might not like Trump, we believe that what he is saying should be able to be seen by voters and citizens in the United States and people around the world, whether it be good, bad, or ugly. Back to you.
Run it, Q.
Well, Trump has responded to Meta's move with a post on the site Truth Social, saying in part, Facebook, which has lost billions of dollars in value since deplatforming your favorite president, me, has just announced that they are reinstating my account. Such a thing should never again happen to a sitting president or anybody else who is not deserving of retribution. Meantime, Brazil's Supreme Court has fined Telegram about $236,000 for not blocking the account of a far-right elected official. The messaging app has been asked to suspend the accounts of Nicolas Ferreira and some other supporters of former President Jair Bolsonaro. In a letter obtained by CNN, Brazil, Telegram requested the court to reconsider the decision, as Ferreira is an elected member of Congress. In a statement, the Supreme Court acknowledges Telegram reported partial compliance with the order, but gave the app 5 days to pay the fine.
On camera, take what you see.
The death toll in anti-government protests in Peru has now risen to at least 57. Police and protesters have been clashing daily since December as the country faces its worst outbreak of violence in decades. Peru's president vows to investigate alleged abuses by authorities against demonstrators, and although the Organization of American States is expressing its full support for her, Dina Boluarte is calling for early elections.
Right, Chakaday. 25 with a bite.
I would also like to ask some of my colleagues, which way out of the crisis in Peru are you proposing? The way out by violence? Or peace and democracy?
Support them.
I have asked Congress to approve the early elections as soon as possible. And I sincerely hope that the friendly countries of the region will support them.
Go. Q.
Peru's president adds that the violence has caused more than $1 billion in damages to public and private property. Protesters have been calling for political changes since the impeachment and arrest of former President Pedro Castillo. At least 2 people are dead and 7 injured after a knife attack on a passenger train in northern Germany on Wednesday. The suspect was arrested at this train station. It's unclear if the train was stopped at the station or was traveling nearby when the attack took place. The motive is unknown.
On camera, take what
In Spain, the suspect in a machete attack at 2 churches has now been detained by police. Police say this man wounded a priest at one church in southern Spain, then killed an assistant at another church. The assistant initially managed to escape, but officials say the suspect chased him down and killed him just before police arrived. The incidents are being investigated as terrorist attacks. A grim warning from the West on Iran's expanding nuclear capabilities, with the IAEA now claiming Iran has enriched a stockpile of uranium that could eventually become nuclear weapons. Those details just ahead.
COVID.
Plus, China says COVID cases have fallen dramatically. We will visit a rural village to see how people are celebrating the Lunar New Year now that Beijing has ended its zero COVID policy. Back with that and more in just a moment.
We're a break, Master. 2 minutes on the break. That's just all kinds of wrong.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
We'll do your COVID wipe coming in.